Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the PROGCAST. I'm your host, Gregg Bendian, and I have the great pleasure today of actually speaking with a colleague and someone who is very involved with the education process and spreading the word about all sorts of cool music to people, as we get to do on a fairly regular basis at William Paterson University in New Jersey, where Payton MacDonald is the head of the music department as well as the head of the percussion department. So we always have a lot to talk about, and there's always a lot of cool stuff going on. He's always into very interesting projects, and I would say, in addition to being a great marimbist, just a general percussionist, really serious about education, and we'll talk about that. And also, he's quite an extreme musician, and I definitely want to talk about that. So, hey, Payton, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I thought it would be interesting to hear from you a little bit about how, I mean, this is kind of funny because I always say this lovingly, really, but like, how did you get into weird music? But it's like, you know, what really more than that is, you know, what was your early, connection to music?
Well, I think I partly got into it just because I was always sort of on my own. It was always a DIY project, at least at certain times. So I was born and raised in Idaho, and I spent the first 17 years of my life there going to public schools. I don't come from a musical family. My father was a nuclear engineer, and my mom was a school teacher. She taught reading and art. And my dad liked classical music, and he had a really good record collection, LP collection, actually, of classical and jazz. He did his undergrad at the University of Michigan, which is where I ended up doing mine. And when he was there, this was in the 60s, he got deep into jazz, and he would go into Detroit a lot and go to the clubs. And he saw a lot of the major artists like Miles Davis, and he saw Thelonious Monk play a couple times, and cats like of that caliber. And so he collected records, and I remember seeing those records. But I don't know, my mom tells me even when I was in the crib, I was just always like very responsive to music and always moving to music and always wanting it on.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started. We had this electric organ in the house, and my mom wanted me to learn how to play electric organ. So she started me on lessons when I was about 8. And I honestly didn't like it that much. I was more into skateboarding and snowboarding and stuff like that at the time. But my teacher wanted me to focus on some rhythmic stuff because I was struggling with some piece I was supposed to be learning. And so she had my parents give me a practice pad and some drumsticks. And I like those much better than the electric organ. And so I begged my parents to get me a drum set. And they did for my, I guess it was 9th birthday or 10th birthday, somewhere around there. And that got me started as playing drums. So, but it's Idaho. It was Idaho Falls. It was Southeast Idaho. And it was sort of an interesting scene there because I started playing in the school bands. There was a large Mormon population. I wasn't raised Mormon, but a lot of my friends were. But the thing about Mormons is that they're into classical music in a general sense. So even though we were this, kind of small town of 40,000 people, we had a youth symphony, we had a semi-professional symphony, we had an opera company that put on a couple operas every year. And it was all like 19th century and before. There maybe the only 20th century stuff might be something like Rachmaninoff or something like that, or Gershwin. But there was stuff to do, and so I was doing that, and I was doing high school band after, by the time I got through middle school, high school, I was doing marching band, which was a pretty sad affair. There were like 18 of us, including the color guard. So it wasn't like some Texas situation, it was, but I was playing in combos, and I was playing in the big band. So it was kind of one thing led to another. I started the drum lessons. I got deep into first rock and pop drumming. So I was listening to Neil Peart, hit me right away. Lars Ulrich hit me right away, because I was into early Metallica. And then I found all these jazz records my dad had, and I'll never forget. I don't remember the exact record, but it was like a collection of solos by major jazz drummers. So it was like these little 3-minute selections. So it was like Elvin Jones and Max Roach and Philly Joe, Kenny Clark, all playing these little 3-minute solos. And man, that thing just blew my mind. I just had never heard drums like that. So getting into high school, I'm now playing a lot of jazz drums. I'm starting to learn mallets. I'm starting to learn how to read music. I didn't really know how to read pitched music till I was like 13 or 14, honestly. And then somehow I discovered classical marimba, and it was really like more of a classical approach at first. Like I was really kind of checking out older stuff like Bach transcriptions, and I was kind of into Lee Howard Stevens. Like that was sort of the scene at first. But along that same time, at the age of 16, I discovered in our public library John Cage's Silence. And I read that book at the age of 16.
Hmm.
So I would say my entry point into experimental music was kind of like all those things swirling together.
Yeah.
And then Cage's Silence was like, I don't know, sort of a spear point of sorts that sort of like marshaled all that and moved me forward. Yeah, and then I went to Interlochen Arts Academy after my junior year of high school. I went to the summer camp. And man, that was so incredible to be around all these people who were so into music the way that I was. Because there weren't many of us at my public high school. There was like a couple of us that we would hang out, we'd go to concerts. We were also really into Russian lit and into poetry. Like we were really the artsy kind of intellectual kids for the humanities. And so I got to Interlochen, and it's like every kid was like that. And it was just amazing. And so I auditioned for this scholarship to stay for my senior year. I didn't tell my parents, and I got the scholarship. And then I called my parents and said, I don't want to come home. I want to I want to stay here my senior year. And I got this scholarship that'll cover a lot of the tuition. And
Wow.
there was a lot of back and forth on that for a few weeks, but they eventually relented. They were really supportive. And so I spent my senior year at Interlochen, where I started playing more experimental music because John Alfieri was running the percussion studio at that time. And I remember playing Cage's Third Construction and getting introduced to Lou Harrison, um, getting introduced to African drumming
Mhm.
through John Alfieri because he'd been to Ghana a couple times and brought back some of that knowledge. So then it's like jazz, world music, experimental music, Western classical, all just like swirling together, you know? And then undergrad at University of Michigan, and then I did my graduate degrees at Eastman. And when I was at University of Michigan, that's where I really started branching out. There's a really heavy cat there named Steve Rush, who is a composer and brilliant pianist and improviser, and another guy named Ed Sareth that I hooked up with.
I know, Ed.
So, yeah, I figured you did. And so I was playing in the Creative Arts Orchestra, I was playing in the Digital Music Ensemble, I was playing in the New Music Ensemble, and then, of course, Percussion Ensemble with Mike Udow. We were doing everything, man. Like Xenakis, my first semester there, he did a Fluxus concert, like all this Fluxus rep. And I'll never forget, like, I was 18 and the concert starts with Mike Udow, who's a big guy, he was a big guy at the time, running in the into onto the stage with a helmet and diving into a tam tam. That was like that was my first percussion ensemble concert
Wow,
at Michigan.
really? Wow,
And we were
my.
doing all this crazy stuff. None of it really like percussion exact per se, but it was like, and so I don't know, through all that, I started taking comp lessons and I was improvising everything from like learning standards and all 12 keys on the vibraphone. Plus, I was still doing straight ahead jazz drumming. But then I was really checking out interstellar space and like all the, everything just kept opening. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, here I am.
Interstellar space.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a particular favorite and something actually that I treated as repertoire. And, did all of those pieces in our version with Nels Cline on
Mm.
guitar. And it was, it's very much a free thing, but at the same time, it also had form and it had structure, it had motifs. I wanted to talk to you about that idea in improvisation. What do you feel that you're using as your fodder when you get into a situation that's like a free improvised situation, like I saw you in with Nava Dunkelman? What's the starting
Yeah.
point for you? Do you go blank and just go with the thing, or do you have a plan?
I usually don't have a plan. And the people when I'm playing with people, interestingly, we rarely talk about anything. Nava and I will sometimes, before we go on, we'll make a few decisions up front, but it's nothing specific with grammar or vocabulary. It's more like, why don't we start with something kind of in a medium length, 7, 8 minutes, and then at some point, why don't we do some miniatures? And then, I'll often suggest, I'll suggest to Nava, why don't you take a solo? Like, I think it'd be nice for me to lay out for a while,
Hmm.
like we'll talk about that, but we never talk about tonality or rhythm or anything. But I don't know. The thing is, we found each other musically. I think I'd mentioned this to you. I was doing a gig with James Ilgenfritz, and he had brought all these really interesting players together. Ross Moshe was there, and um, gosh, I'd have to look back. There was just like 3 years ago. There were so many good people who I've played with some more since then. But anyway, and just in the course of playing, Nava and I kind of kept finding ourselves conversing in a way that seemed to have a kind of internal logic of sorts. And so, yeah, we just started playing. I mean, I think in that situation, the interesting thing about Nava and I is that we both are classically trained percussionists. But we both have always been very intentional and serious about trying to develop as improvisers, as so free improvisers or open improvisers, whatever term one wants to use. She doesn't have a jazz background, so that vocabulary, and I do, but my straight ahead jazz chops are pretty much like it's like a language that I haven't really spoken for 20 years. So, I mean, if I had to play like a small gig somewhere on drum set, I could probably manage, but you would not want to hire. Like, I'm not the first guy to hire for that. That, and same thing with vibraphone. Like, I'm sure if I had to, I could learn some standards again. And I mean, at one point, I was playing a lot of standards and transcribing a lot of Milt Jackson and Bobby Hutcherson, and a lot of trumpet actually transcribes pretty well the vibes. So a lot of Louis Armstrong. That's where I learned a lot about form. Actually, was checking out Louis Armstrong stuff, but also Miles, because you can actually do it. Like, Freddie Hubbard's hard, or Lee Morgan. It's so choppy. It's harder to transcribe. Because when I was doing all that, that was pre software. You had to like do it on a cassette. Like in real time, it was hard.
Hmm.
But anyway, so all that is to say, it depends a lot on who I'm working with. When I'm playing with like Elliot Sharp, or like if it's just Elliot and I playing, I sort of know Elliot, and like we've had dinners and we've had coffee, and I've listened to so much of his music and I've been to his concerts, and so we don't really talk much either, but I kind of have a sense before we play what might work with him and what might not. But when I'm with him and with Billy Martin and Colin Stetson, when I'm with that quartet, that's a whole other ball game. Like, Colin, a lot of times he and I kind of hook up in these sort of minimalist, almost modal realms that work really beautifully between the saxophone. And I'm often playing marimba in that context. Billy is a really just far-ranging creative artist who just kind of does a million things really, really well. But he'll often bring in a 2 and a 4. Like Billy has this very deep
Hmm.
sense of pocket and feel. It's like just one of the most beautiful senses of groove I've ever experienced. And so, that about these players like this, their history, their predilections, you kind of know where they might go. And I will say, I think that maybe informs things a little bit.
I
But
think that's fair.
yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of stuff, but I tend to want to work with players who are just curious and checking out tons of stuff.
Hmm.
For me, there's no problem like weaving Xenakis into Coltrane. Like it's all vocabulary. It's all just part of our history and our culture. And I don't know. I'm kind of rambling. It's hard. It's
No,
hard
I
to
agree
talk.
with
It's hard
you.
to talk about improvisation, though. It's
No,
tough.
I agree with you that all of these different types of improvisation that we've experienced, I mean, idiomatic, non-idiomatic, texture. I mean, when I talk about working with Derek Bailey, I say what we did was very much clang, farb, and melody.
Mm.
So, that's only because I knew he was a Webern guy, and you wouldn't know it maybe unless you knew it, but you could see the connection with every note's going to be on a different string with a different either way of stopping the note or making a harmonic happen or an artificial harmonic or just whatever it was. So it was like everything was like, oh my God, he's so note specific.
Mhm.
But you could see that it was very much about timbre. And when you work with non-percussion, timbre's like our jam, right? It's like in so many ways we're composing with timbre. And when you find other musicians like that, like, coming up playing with Zorn, where we're like timbre was the texture was the language all the time. And you're right. It's interesting timing of miniatures. When you mention that term, I like that very much. It's like the timing of little events. How much do you want to spend on that? How much do you not want to spend on that? Right?
Yeah.
Such an interesting way to, like, do you think of that as strategy? Or are you listening? Are you waiting to hear what's your style? Because I feel like listening is such a big part of this.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, the thing about open improvisation, I'll say open, but free improvisation is fine too. I mean, some people get have strong opinions about the terminology, but I usually use open only in the sense that I like the idea that you're kind of opening things and letting things in. But I always feel a lot of it has to do with choices I make. And what's interesting about that is that I don't always know why I make choices, and I'm not always sure if I'm making the right one or not. And there's a kind of flow state I can get into where I'm really not, I'm sort of dimly aware somewhere that I'm making choices, but I'm so involved with the choice making that I haven't moved to that other abstraction level where I'm thinking about that. And what's interesting is when I go back and listen later, there are times where I'll hear things and I'll feel like, wow, that was a good choice. And other times I'll be like, that was maybe not my best choice. But my sort of evaluation of that later doesn't always match up with what I might be feeling in the moment. I mean, there's times where I'll choose to do something which might be not play. That might be the choice. And in the moment, sometimes I'll be not sure if this is the right choice. And then later I listen to it and I'm like, wow, that was absolutely the right choice. But listening I mean, at some point you got to play something, I guess. You don't have to. I suppose you could get on stage and not play at all. But I do force myself not to play. That is one very intentional strategy I take on anytime I'm improvising with other people. And the way I do it, because I have a lot of energy and a lot of, I'm a very active and kind of nervously energetic person, is I will physically put my mallets down and step away from the instrument.
Yeah.
Because I find if I have the mallets in my hand, it's usually what it is, Greg, is I'm so enthused about what my colleagues are doing that it's like, I have this, I want to contribute. Like this conversation is so great. I want to jump in and I want to be part of this conversation. But many times that's not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is let them speak, like give them a chance, And also it's nice when I go to open improvisation concerts and you might have a quartet that funnels down to a solo or a trio for a while. I love that. And that's the composer in me thinking about if I was writing a string quartet, I might have them all four playing all the time. That might be the right choice for that movement. But there might be movements where it thins down to one person, right?
Well, I like that you mentioned that because that's exactly the kind of stuff that I steal. If I'm in a free situation, it doesn't mean that anything could happen. It means that I'm going to make certain things happen and not let other things happen. And yes, an amazing strategy is to finish an idea. See, that's the only thing I wanted to add to what you're laying out is if you finish an idea and you're done with that idea, take a moment. Lay out. You know what I mean? Like you finished your idea. Hey, you landed it. It's funny. I'll say that. It's like sometimes I'm like, wait, that's fine for a minute. Just leave that, And I think that knowing when to shut up is really important. And also you're orchestrating that way as well.
Yeah.
You're actively changing the groupings, And that's the thing. Oh man, we were obsessed with that. Any of these pieces, like particularly, any group that I had to make sure that every combination of instruments was used all the time. I was really obsessive about that. And I
Yeah,
think that you talk about the jazz influence and just attitudes about democratic band treatment, ideally that can be utilized in a free improv situation, right?
totally. And that is one thing. I mean, when I play with Void Patrol, that group doesn't play much. We only play 2 or 3 concerts a year, but that is the one thing we will sometimes discuss for like a couple minutes backstage is just we kind of remind each other, um, let's let some solos happen. Let's let some trios happen. Um, let's not always be in a hurry to go from one idea to a next
Mm-hmm.
to another one. Maybe let's let some things kind of percolate. That's about all we do. And it's not, and no one's controlling it. It's more like we just kind of, talk it, remind each other to give some space. And yeah, I remember the one concert we did, I think it was up in Montreal on the FIMA festival. I remember there's one time Colin and I laid out for like 10 minutes. We didn't play a note. I actually sat down. I had a chair. I just sat down for a bit. Colin was kind of crouched on the floor, but he even took his mouthpiece off. Like we didn't play a note, and it was just like an extended conversation between Elliot and Billy. Like, and it was great. We just didn't need to play. There
Yeah.
was a lot of really interesting things happening there, and it was really nice that they just had the space to have that conversation. And then eventually, we moved it in another direction. But
But that's
yeah, that's part
listening.
of, you talked about education. That's one of the things we have to work on with the students a bit, right? Because as they're developing as improvisers, is helping them understand they've worked hard to build chops, but they don't need them. They don't need to use them all the time.
Yeah. It's a big one.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think like no matter what, particularly with the producer course at the school and with the song course, I'm kind of like infusing listening as part of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Careful listening. What little detail did you hear? And that's already opening up a world of sound, layers of things. Well, if you understand how the Beatles layered something, say for instance, that can already give you an idea of how you might layer a drone kind of piece, or how you might have heard a model of some sort there. And so yeah, and I like that interconnectedness too, that this kind of frontier, I like to think of it as what you mentioned, open. It's wide open, right? So you're open to the point of, when I said extreme music, I want to talk about that, but also, that metal is an interest of yours, and that heavy music can also be something that now, as we've seen in a lot of cases, very engaging.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always loved metal. I mean, I think part of it is as a drummer. I mean, I'm not really a drummer anymore. Like, I don't play drum set that much anymore. But starting being a percussionist and being attracted to the drums, that's such a central part of the metal experience and the history. And that music still speaks to me very deeply. I still listen to it regularly, all kinds of stuff. I still enjoy a lot of the old stuff. Master of Puppets is still a cool recording. I still dig it. I was listening to what was Slayer's first recording, Rain and Blood. Like some of that stuff I was listening to, I still listen to that stuff, but some of the newer bands, or at least they're newer to me, but they're actually they're actually older now. But like, you and I were talking about Meshuggah a few weeks ago, and
Yeah.
to me, that is just some of the best music being made on the planet right now. It's right up there with anything the New York Phil is doing, anything that Lincoln Center Jazz is doing. It's just very, very interesting and beautifully composed and intentional and focused and virtuosic music. It's just very high level stuff, in my opinion. And I just love it. It really speaks to me in a lot of ways. So yeah, I listen to metal quite a bit. Car Bomb is a
Mhm.
band favorite of mine. I went and heard them down in Philly last year. They were just fantastic. It's an absolutely fantastic concert. So yeah, I wish I played in a metal band. I'm not, but I am working, I've been studying the classical music of India for a very long time in a very serious way, and I perform it professionally and teach it and so on. And I am working on this, kind of trying to bring together my singing. I sing Drupad, which is a particular subgenre of Hindustani music, with drone metal. So I've been listening to like this band, Bell Witch, for example. It's a really great band. They got out of Seattle. But it's these very long form tunes, very, very sort of slow BPM, a lot of kind of distorted drones and
Huh.
very kind of atmospheric. That band Sun O, I don't know if you know that group.
No.
Oh yeah, you should check them out. It's like SUNO and then all these like parentheses marks. That's a very interesting sort of drone doom metal band. So I've been listening to that, and I'm actually working on the beginnings of a project of sort of merging that with Drupad, which is also a similarly sort of long scale, slow kind of thing. So I might be in a metal band soon. I'm trying. I had to find my own way into it, but yeah.
Yeah. It's funny how it comes in, and I was also thinking about, I saw the recent Meshuggah tour, and I looked at the schedule just out of curiosity, and there were times where they did 3 one-nighters in a row, and I didn't understand how that could be physically possible.
Because aren't those guys in their 60s now?
They're pushing 60.
Wow.
Yeah. And so looking at that and then seeing like the last night of the tour at Madison Square Garden and just seeing how physically just demanding that music is. And then they're doing Bleed at the end.
Wow.
And I'm just saying like, what? How do you how does one pace oneself and develop this? And I mean, it's such a level of commitment. And you're right. The level of detail, but then also there's sort of like organized madness to it, particularly with Frederick's solos, where you never know what's going to happen and kind of what he's going to do, even though he has areas. And that's something that I find interesting too, is that, everybody has their areas that they work in. Yeah. And when they're defined and focused, as you mentioned earlier, that's our goal, right? Is to really kind of bring that idea to fruition. And they're doing that.
I wonder, maybe but I suspect maybe those guys take care of themselves, I mean, the metal world, if you look at like Ozzy Osbourne and Motley Crue, like, that people did not take care of themselves.
They're not those guys.
No, I think they're, like from Tool,
Danny.
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy who takes care of himself as far as I know.
Yeah.
And that's why he's also in his 50s, maybe 60s now, and doesn't seem to be having any problems with tendonitis or anything like that. He can play long shows just fine, But your diet, your exercise, your sleep habits, not drinking all that stuff catches up after a while, especially when you get in your 50s and 60s, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you have to, with Mahavishnu Project, I'm doing a 2-hour show, very physical. But if you don't go to the gym and watch what you're going to eat that day, I have a ritual of what I'm trying to get in my body early.
Yeah.
For the full day, it's a 3-meal day. No question. It's a 3-meal day, and there's going to be dinner before the show. I don't eat after the show. I mean, I don't want to eat late anyway. But I do need the fuel. And if you sort of knowing that, and then you don't get tired, and then hydrating.
Right.
It's all those, it's kind of basic stuff, but pulling it off as a ritual puts you in that creative space. And I think so much of what we do is antithetical to getting into creative space. What we're up against, an air conditioner or, somebody's squeaky chair, but we have to get into our space.
Yeah.
Right. And that's so important because I feel like we're creating our own universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a couple of things I wanted to ask you about when we were speaking a couple of weeks ago, I guess. You talked about your involvement with biking and how you tie that into big form pieces or a series of pieces. And I wonder if you could tell people about that, because it's very interesting.
Yeah, well, I did a big project in 2016 called Sonic Divide. And if people are interested, it's just sonicdivide.com. And at the time, I was doing increasingly longer bikepacking trips. Bikepacking is a kind of newer sport. It was developed in America about 20, 30 years ago. And it's basically like backpacking, but on a mountain bike. And it's similar to bike touring, but what makes it different is that you're on a mountain bike rather than a road bike, and you're mostly using soft bags rather than panniers, which enable you to ride really rugged stuff. So bikepacking tends to be more off-road rather than on-road. So I started off, I discovered bikepacking, around 2009 or 10. And the way I discovered it was actually through a book and then a movie about the Tour Divide. The Tour Divide is a race that was started in about 2005 on the Great Divide mountain bike route. And the Great Divide mountain bike route was made in the mid 90s by the Adventure Cycling Association, which is based in Montana. It's a nonprofit organization. And it was originally designed as a border to border route running north south or south north, but in the United States along the Continental Divide. And the Continental Divide is a geographical feature of North America that basically demarcates whether water flows to the east or the west. And in our country, it runs through Montana, Wyoming, a little corner of Idaho, near where I grew up, Colorado, and New Mexico. So these people mapped out this route that always stays within about 50 miles of the Continental Divide. And there are large parts of the route where you're actually right on it. But they're all roads that you can access on your bicycle, and it's a mix. It's about 80% dirt. And it's a mix of gravel roads and these like mining roads, single track, these old kind of like they're not really used trails anymore, but they're still rideable more or less. And it's an absolutely amazing route. And so it was originally people would just tour it and they would take several months to do it. And then some guys in like 2005, 2006 got this idea to do it as a race. So they would start on the Montana-Canada border and race to go south. And then the route was extended up to Banff. And then the race was extended. It starts in Banff and goes south. Or you can go north, but every year there's a grand depart, which is the word they use in the cycling community, where everyone comes together and they leave at once. And it's basically once the race starts, the clock is just ticking. So it's whoever gets to the southern border first is the winner. And the way you know people don't cheat is everybody has a spot satellite tracker. And that tracker goes to a website. And actually, right before you called me, I was checking because the race is going on right now. I was looking in to see who was where. So I got interested in this race, and so I started building up starting around 2010. I started first just doing quick overnighters, like I would just ride from my home in West Orange out to Pennsylvania and back the next day, or I'd go up to the Catskills and I would come up with like 150-mile route, and I'd do like 75 miles one day, 75 miles, and I would try to find routes or I would make routes that were mostly dirt, gravel roads. And then I worked my way up, and then in 2014 I tried to race the Divide. So I flew out to Banff and I tried to do the race. And I was doing okay. I was kind of in the middle of the pack. At that point it was growing in popularity because a film had come out and Outside Magazine had done a feature article. And so I got out there. It's always in the summer, and I was in the middle of the pack. I was doing about 100 plus miles a day. But after about 5 days, I made some mistakes with my nutrition and so on. And I was kind of a wreck. Like my body was falling apart. I was totally blown out my Achilles tendons from pushing my bike through miles and miles of snow on these upper passes. Even though it's in June, you're way up there. There's a lot of snow. Right. And so after 5 days, I bailed. But before I bailed, I was on this, it was Red Rock Pass in Montana. I was by myself. I'd been by myself for most of the day, and I was pushing my bike through the snow, and there was this big lake up there, a beautiful lake. It was frozen. And I just started singing. raga. And it was the way it was reverberating around the lake. I had this instantaneous flash in my mind. I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do this as a race. I'm going to come back and do this as some kind of interdisciplinary musical event. So that's what I did. I rode for a couple more days and then I bailed. I did about 500 miles total. I went home. I was going to come back the next year, but I broke my wrist, so I had to take a year off. And then in 2016, I had all the stars lined up and I did the Sonic Divide project. So what I did is I rode the Great Divide mountain bike route, but I rode north. So I started on the Mexican border and I rode up to the Canadian border and I stopped. I didn't go all the way to Banff. So I did 2,500 miles and I commissioned 30 composers because the route crosses the Continental Divide 30 times. Like literally crosses the geographical feature. And every time I hit the divide crossings, I would stop and I would set out a couple GoPro cameras and a little Zoom recording device, and I would perform these pieces that these composers wrote for me in the wilderness. And originally the plan was I would just perform the pieces and throw them up on YouTube. But I started doing some interviews with some of the composers I was working with just for some added content. And the interviews were so good and were so deep and interesting that I kind of stumbled into making a film. And I realized by the time I got home, between all the interviews I had and the footage of me doing these pieces, plus all the biking footage and everything, that I had a film. And so I took some lessons, like I learned how to use Adobe Premiere. And I also just kind of did a crash course in like how to make a film. And I did. I made a documentary film, which actually did pretty well. It got into 6 film festivals. It won Best Documentary at one of them and runner-up at another one. And I ended up making 3 versions. There's like the full hour and a half, which is really a balance between the cycling and the music, the experimental music. There's a shorter hour version that's more focused on the cycling, and then there's a 10-minute short that is just sort of like the larger one, but small.
So what's happening musically?
What's that?
What's happening musically in each of these cases?
Yeah, so it really depended on the composer. I had a few things I told the composers. One is that all I'm going to bring is a pair of mallets. So you can write percussion stuff, but it has to be for found objects, logs, rocks, whatever, or the bicycle, or I can sing, or I can clap or whatever, but I'm not going to be bringing instruments, and there won't be instruments out there. So they all wrote with that in mind. Some of them wrote pieces that had very little improvisation. Some wrote pieces that had a lot of improvisation. Like Billy Martin, for example, his piece was basically a graphic score, which was really nice. Some of the composers specified that I perform their pieces at specific divide crossings. Like Jerome Kitsky wrote this very, very cool piece called Turning at Togati that has to do with the 6 directions, north, east, southwest, above and below. And it has to do with his connection with indigenous culture. And he wanted me to perform it at Togati Pass in Wyoming, which I did. And so there were several composers who did that, where I had specific things at places I had to do that had to do with the geological features of that place or the history, the cultural history of that place. It was great. And of course, I could have written all those pieces myself, but I thought it would be neat. It would be interesting to bring more people into the project and see what their minds conceived of. And it was so great. Like Melissa Gray wrote me this really cool piece called Blur, and I was supposed to perform it at any divide crossing during the blue hour, which is when dusk starts settling in. And that's always a heavy hour, because if I've been pedaling for like 14, 15 hours straight, at that point I'm getting, and I'm always by myself when I do this stuff. So it's an intense kind of experience. You're in very remote places, very few people. And when dusk comes, it can be emotionally kind of heavy. It's actually easier when it's full dark and you're just in this cone of light for a while, but dusk is like so anyway, she wrote this piece, and I hit a divide crossing. It was in Montana right during dusk. And she wanted me to do it near water, and I found water. Anyway, it was just a really cool project. So yeah, that's the kind of thing I was trying to figure out, how to bring together these 2 lives, my life as an ultra endurance cyclist with my life as an experimental musician. And that's really what the whole project is about, is how do those things connect?
Very cool. Really cool stuff, Payton. It's really a pleasure to be in a music department with other creative musicians. And I think that we have a kind of unique program in that way. William Paterson is known for practitioners being the faculty, and everybody's got gigs and everybody's out there creating. And that's just so cool, isn't it? I mean, it's just so exciting, and everybody's always doing something, and we always have concerts going on. A piece of mine was played by this wonderful French pianist that we have as an exchange student, Simone, and it was. It's just a feeling currently that we're getting some really talented people in there, and that my goal, I can say as an educator, is that they go out and create. So they take what we give them and they go and they run with it, you know? And if that happens, I feel like success. Or if we deepen their appreciation of really what's going on, I feel we have a success. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. No, William Paterson has always been a bastion for creative music. And a lot of that credit, I think, has to go to Ray DeRoche, who was my predecessor directing the percussion area, because he started the new music series back in the 70s. And he was commissioning these big pieces from Charles Warren and David Saperstein and all these wonderful composers.
And if I could jump in, is if you folks know the None Such ionization, that's the Ray DeRoche ionization, which for many of us is a definitive version of ionization by Edgard Varese. So yeah, we got to hang in the presence of Ray DeRoche. Actually, he came to one of the recent new music shows at the school, and he's the king, right? I mean, he just made so many of these new music things happen with an enthusiasm of a basketball coach. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's Carl Bolea, who's our piano professor, is directing the new music series right now, and I really have been impressed with Carl has taken a very ecumenical approach to that, in the sense that not only do we have the so-called classical majors doing new music, but he's been bringing in the jazz folks who are doing a lot of composing. He's been getting the pop musicians there. I mean, songwriting is new music too. He's got the digital music creation students sharing their tracks. That's also new music. And I'm just I really like the direction he's taking it right now, where he's just got all of the department kind of involved, and a lot of the polemics and ideological battles of the past, the uptown versus downtown, that stuff is all just kind of faded. It's a new generation of people. We're all listening to lots of stuff. For me, Danny Carey is no lesser of a musician than Lee Howard Stevens. They're both just really amazing percussionists, but they do totally different things,
And we're offering options that I think are so important. So if you have someone that's a strong songwriter, but maybe they are not the strongest singer, then we can open them up to the idea that, keep writing and someone will sing that. And we are very open to whatever style. I mean, in the composition lessons that I've given at William Paterson, I've had everything from total atonal stuff to songwriting and talking about lyrics.
Yeah.
And that's it's a beautiful kind of freedom where not everybody's going to want to write 12 tone. And we grew up in a world, well, I don't want to even go there right now with you, but it's like, yeah, it was really strange what I was told we didn't do, what we weren't allowed to do. And I had some, little patience for that.
Yeah.
I was bad. But you know what I mean? And it's like you went through it, and we don't have to do that.
No.
We don't have to do that.
Yeah.
And I love that about what the program does. So, Payton, we should probably wrap things up, but tell people where they can find your music and what you have coming up, please.
Well, my music's very easy to find. The simplest way is just go to Bandcamp and type in my name, and I have it organized by artists, which basically kind of separates things out a little bit. So because I do produce a lot of work in different genres, and I thought it is all on Spotify. The problem with Spotify, though, is they lump it all together. With Bandcamp is such a better platform. I mean, the artists actually get paid. There's space for proper liner notes. Bandcamp is just, as far as I'm concerned, heads and shoulders beyond Spotify or Apple Music, anything else. especially because they pay the artists a reasonable fair wage, which I think is nice. You know, you should get paid to have your recordings out there. But anyway, if you go to Bandcamp, there's information about the different things I do there, and then I have a website like everyone else. In terms of what is coming up, I have since I finished Sonic Divide, I started a new project 2 years ago called Sonic Peaks, and that's an ongoing project where I'm hiking all of the highest 146 mountains in the Northeast. I've done about 56 of them so far, and then I make graphic scores based on them. So like a lot of these up on the wall, but like here's one I was working on recently for Colden, which
Oh,
is a
wow.
mountain up in the Adirondacks that I summited a few months ago. So I'm making graphic scores of all these, and then I'm doing recordings of them as a soloist, and then I have other people making recordings of them, and I have on the Bandcamp page there's a recording right now for the Catskills peaks, and then I'm going to start a recording for some of the Adirondacks peaks. But these have also been exhibited in art galleries, 3 different galleries so far, one in Ottawa and one in Vermont and one here in New Jersey, actually. So that project is ongoing, and I actually was kind of paused for a while, but I'm diving back into that for the rest of the summer. And then my trio with Nava Dunkelman and um, Aaron Rodgers, we're going to be starting up again in September with a week up at the Avaloq Artist Colony, and then we're going to be doing some more recordings. And I've got recordings coming out, some duo projects, one with Susie Ibarra. We actually did like 2 years ago, but it's finally coming out later this year. One with Billy Martin, and then another duo recording with Nava Dunkelman. So I have 3 marimba percussion duo things coming out. Actually, you and I should do one at some point. That would be heavy.
We should.
So yeah, lots of recordings and composition projects. I'm finishing up a big string quartet right now for the Bergamot Quartet that they're going to premiere later this summer, and then we're looking at doing recordings this fall. Yeah, I don't know, on and on. I'll be up at Arts, Letters, and Numbers for a couple weeks in August, which is a very cool place in upstate New York where I perform and teach every summer. Michael Harrison runs that program, and VJ Iyer will be there this summer. And Elliot Cole, who's a wonderful composer out of Brooklyn. So yeah, lots happening. Busy.
Great. Very, very cool. Thanks so much for sharing this with us. This is very interesting stuff.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. It's nice to hang with you a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, you're deep into it, man, and very, very inspiring.
Thank
And
you.
it's quite a body of work. Folks, check out Payton MacDonald, and I would say thank you so much, as always, for listening, for your support, for the wonderful comments. I really do appreciate it. We have our own little community here over the years. August is our 5th anniversary. So it's pretty amazing now that we're heading into the 150s of episodes, and really do appreciate the support. And as always, you can hit us on Patreon and support the program. Certainly, thanks to Matt Stober and Elias Bendian for keeping this thing running. And it's always great to talk to interesting musicians, no matter what kind of genre they're coming from. So thanks, Payton.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks so much for having me.
Take care.
Take care.